In this video, I'm going to walk you through the 3 most common causes for low back pain and low back tightness when you're exercising, and ultimately what you're doing in your day-to-day that may be contributing to that tightness in this area, and from there, contributing to your tightness in your hip flexors. The body is connected, and how you sit, how you sleep, how you go and execute lifts is going to ultimately create a pattern, and that pattern is going to perpetuate itself and show up in tightness, in weakness, or if you're doing it the right way, in strength in specific areas. So let's dive into it. And before you watch this one, make sure and check out part 1 where we talk about just the concept of rib cage and pelvic alignment. That's going to make part 2 and part 3 make so much more sense. So the first one we got to look at is going to be how you're sitting. It's going to be one of the most common things that people are running into, and this is going to be one where immediately when I say posture, your shoulders go back, chest goes up, but ultimately posture is something that's dynamic. It's always happening, and it's governed by the central nervous system because you can only for so long consciously have good posture. And so let's just pretend I'm sitting at a desk, or I'm sitting watching TV, I'm sitting playing video games, whatever it is that you're doing, this is going to be that ideal posture. But if you're not training yourself to do it, you're going to slouch into a couple different positions. One, I call video game butt, which is sit right here. So what's actually happening, low back erectors are now at a lengthened position for an extended period of time. So imagine I have my neck just kind of hanging like this, and I one day said, oh man, my neck is really tight. Well, this side is constantly at a shortened position, and this side is constantly at a lengthened position. So if you're constantly sitting like this, and your erectors in this lower back area are being pulled, well, it makes sense. They're constantly being pulled on, they're gonna constantly be tight. That's gonna lead to them being pulled too far. The brain's gonna go and say, hey, we don't like that, no safety, no stability, let's tighten everything back up again. There goes your shooting pain. Next one is also really common that you'll see a lot, is what I call, good coworker, or the good worker, call the stripper butt, whatever you want to call it, the Kim Kardashian, and that's where chest is out, back is arched, right? And now you're compressing in the lower back, rib cage is flared, no tension created through the deeper core muscles here, and you're just here, right? And this is seated. This is something that you're doing for 5, 6, 7 hours a day. If you're in a long car ride, you're sitting like this all day. Maybe you're in a hip, maybe you're riding like this, right? That's all contributing to how your pelvis and how your rib cage works together. So if you're not aware of that and you're not constantly working on maintaining this, well, now you're creating a pattern that your brain is repeating over and over and over and over and over, right? And no amount of little neck straps or gimmicks and gadgets that you find on social media are going to fix this for you, because your brain has to be the one that is governing your default position. Next one you got to look at is how you're training your core when you're lying on your back or on your stomach. So I'm going to lie on my back right here, and this is one of the most common cues you'll see or hear, and it's smash your low back into the floor. So if I'm in this position and I smash my low back into the floor, well, that's the same thing as smashing my low back in that video game position. So if I'm in this position again, I want to maintain a neutral spine. What's not a neutral spine is the opposite. Losing your tension here, creating tension here, because you can no longer hold your legs out, and so your low back lifts off. Ideally, you're going to have a natural curvature. You have an S-shaped curvature to your spine. You should have that natural curvature here, rib cage pulled down. So if I go to do anything, I have that. Now, you might flex into a crunch, or you might lose that momentarily, but this is that ideal position that you're training. And if you're constantly training smashing your low back, or you're constantly training rib cage flaring, tightness here, that's what you're going to get more and more of, right? What you train is going to be what continues to happen. Same thing if I'm on my stomach in this position here. If I'm training extension in my lower back, or I'm training rounded in here, well, that's what you're going to find more and more of. So a good example of that arching in the low back, I'll give you one right here. If I'm doing any kind of hamstring curl and I'm bringing my hamstring curl up and the weight up through my lower back, well, I'm training my core to essentially, or I'm training more likely my lower back to do work that another muscle group should be doing entirely.
In this video, I'm going to show you some of the worst and best ways to sleep. And if you are someone that sleeps in some of those worst positions, I'm gonna show you how you can mitigate some of the postural damage you might be creating. And while this is where the magic happens, the magic really happens from a muscle building standpoint during your sleep. And so if you're sleeping in a way that is impacting your ability to get restful sleep, or you're creating postural foundational positions during your sleep that impacts your mobility, that impacts your flexibility, and ultimately impacts the health of specifically your lower back and that rib cage pelvic alignment, well, we got to get something to clean that up. And that's going to start with how you're sleeping. So let's dive into the worst way for you to sleep. So by far and away, the worst way to sleep is going to be on your stomach. And you might be thinking, but it's the most comfortable, I can't sleep any way else. But ultimately, it's just the least optimal way for you to sleep. And the biggest reason why is because gravity is going to be pulling on a few different areas. First, it's going to be pulling on your lower back. It's going to be putting you into excessive extension, and you're going to find a lot of that tightness in the lower back is contributed to by how you're sleeping. If you were to just stand for even 60 seconds in that big extended position where your lower back is sinking into the bed, you would be like, this is the most uncomfortable thing ever. But you're doing that for 7, 8, 9 hours. And so when you do that for that amount of time, that's going to be what your body starts to set as a default system. That's what your brain finds, and that's what your brain goes to when you're in the gym. And if that's your default system, that's going to lead and contribute to a lot of low back pain and a lot of low back tightness when you do use those muscles too much. The next thing that happens a lot when you're laying on your stomach is that you sleep on the pillow and you almost kind of hug it with your chest. And when that's happening, you're finding a lot of kyphosis, a lot of rounding in the upper back, which is ultimately impacting your thoracic extension. And if you struggle with front squats or planks, anything where you need to find that extension in through the upper back, that's going to be impacted by how much you are rounding through your upper back while you sleep on your pillow. And then the last thing that's happening is that you either need to look left or you need to look right in order to breathe. And if you were to do this for 7, 8 hours at your desk job, well, yeah, you're gonna have a tight neck. And in order for you to breathe when you're laying on your stomach, you're doing the same thing. So your cervical spine and the muscles around your neck are all gonna be put in compromised positions that are far from ideal. The next most common way is a side sleeper. And there's a few different ways in which people will sleep on their sides. First one is with legs long. So if you're someone who just likes to sleep on your side, legs long, this isn't terrible, but what can happen is because gravity is pulling on this leg, you're gonna get internal rotation, and that's gonna start to pull up here. So if you wanna make this a little bit better, you would put something between your legs so that your hips can be a little bit more neutral. Now, that's probably the least common one that people will find themselves in. The next one that is probably the most common is some sort of fetal position. And the thing to look out here is not only is this leg being pulled down, which you would want to pull this in to help that be a little bit more neutral, but now you're spending so much more time in hip flexion. You do this when you're seated at your desk, you do this when you're driving your car, and now you're doing this for 7, 8, 9 hours in this position. So the hip flexors get tight. Well, if the hip flexors are constantly tight, then that's going to impact other things cross-chain across the body. So if you are going to sleep like that for the majority of the time, make sure you do this hip flexor stretch for 30 to 60 seconds before and after bed so that you are loosening up those muscles. The next thing you got to look out for when you're in this position is what are your shoulders doing? A lot of people end up hugging their chest, which is ultimately putting your shoulders in more internal rotation. Well, this is where you spend a lot of your time on your desk. This is where you spend a lot of the time on your phones. And so if you're just doing this, you're making it much more likely for you to have shoulder impingement, which is going to impact your ability to press and do anything overhead. So what I like to make sure you're doing is getting some sort of external rotation right here. So sliding this hand underneath so that if you were to make almost like a fist, there's a fist between your head and your hand. And that external rotation here isn't necessarily going to happen, but this is where you can be in a much better position. The last thing to look at is your head. If you got a big beefy pillow that is holding you up here, well, there's a ton of tension now here. This lower side is being pulled on and being strained. So you want to be able to find something that's a little bit more neutral. You also don't want to find something that's here. That's going to impact your neck as well. So finding a soft pillow that gives you that neutral position, getting the pillow into your legs here gives you that neutral position as well. Now everything's a lot more stacked. Yes, you are a little bit more in hip flexion for an extended period of time, but it's not as detrimental as some of the positions that you'll see people in, which is like this. It's like they're literally still stuck in the womb. And then the final side lying position that's also really common is going to be the lower twist. So what's happening here is you've got your bottom leg straight, bottom leg twisted. And while this might feel good in a yoga class or it might be a good stretch after a workout, that's only ideal for 60 to 120 seconds. If you're holding this for, again, 7, 8, 9 hours, essentially what you're doing is you're finding that rotation in the lumbar spine. You're finding that rotation rather, in this area. So you're gonna wake up and feel a lot of tension, a lot of stress, a lot of soreness here. I can already feel it being in this position in this twisted area. So if you were going to make this a little bit better, you'd put a block underneath, or not a block, that would be more yoga. You'd put a pillow underneath, but even then, it's really hard to find kind of that ideal position, which is gonna lead us to ideally where you would sleep majority of the time so that you can stay stacked. So by far and away, the most ideal way for you to be sleeping, unless you're pregnant or you have some sort of medical reason to sleep otherwise, it's gonna be on your back. And a few things you wanna keep out an eye for here, even though you might be lying on your back, is how soft is your bed. If your bed's really soft, your hips are going to sink in even more. If your bed is really soft, your back might sink in even more, and that's gonna contribute to that rounded back. That's gonna contribute to that lower back extension. So if you have a firm mattress, that's gonna be ideal, but something that also might help from a hip flexor standpoint is getting a bed where you can have pillows or a bed that elevates your legs. And another thing that I've found helpful is putting this in a lower back position here, where now I can just have a nice, relaxed, neutral spine. I'm not gonna shift left to right. And then the last component of this is, what are your shoulders doing, right? Ideally, you can just get your chest to be nice and neutral, shoulders back. Sometimes people will sleep like this. It's not as common, it's not as detrimental, but just allowing yourself to essentially be in a zombie kind of corpse-like mode is gonna be ideal. The last thing, I know I said last thing, but this is really the last thing, is just, again, the pillow and what it is doing to your neck and the positioning here. You get those big beefy pillows that has you here in this tuck position. Well, this is what you're doing when you're on your phone. This is what you're doing when you're on your desk. So if you can really make sure that you are getting a neutral position and allow for some of that curvature in your neck, this is gonna be where you wanna be. Sometimes I've even had nights where I sleep without a pillow and then put a little towel underneath my neck to give me some of that decompression of this area. And that's something that feels really good as well. And it might be really hard for you to train that position, but just like training a bad habit into a good one, it's gonna take time. You do gotta be diligent with it. So if you wake up and you catch yourself out of that position, try and bring yourself back into that lying position, and eventually you get to a point to where you can go the entire night in that space. So just as a quick recap, lying on your stomach is gonna be one of the worst ways for you to sleep. If you are gonna lay on your side, make sure and use supports, make sure and get some external rotation rather than internal rotation of your shoulders, and make sure that your neck is not shifted too far left or right for an extended period of time. The ideal way is gonna be lying on your back. Get your shoulders back, get yourself in a nice neutral position, make sure that you have a firm enough mattress so that you're not sinking in, and make sure that your pillow isn't cranking your neck forward, back, left, or right.
So those might not seem like big deals, but all three of those areas are happening every single day. And if you do so while those might not seem like big major moments where you're gonna create a ton of low back pain, you're doing those every single day. And when you do those every single day, it creates a pattern that the brain is running, and it's a system, it's a default program that your brain is running over and over and over. And until you train your brain to do something differently, that's what it's going to refer to when things get sped up, when things get heavier, when things get harder, or when you're not thinking about it, because it's a subconscious program that you're running. So whether you're sleeping, whether you're doing core exercises, whether you're sitting with your posture, really try and be aware of it, because the more that you can bring awareness and then make the changes that we're going to cover in part 3, that's how you're going to start to change your core, how it sits naturally, how it reinforces itself when it needs stability, and ultimately that's going to eliminate your low back pain, and you're going to be able to lift, move throughout your day, and just live a fun, happy, athletic life without that nagging low back pain and tightness. Thanks for watching. If you got value out of this video, hit that like and subscribe button. Drop any comments or questions down below, and be sure and check out part 3 where I walk you through the specific exercises that you can use every single day to reinforce a stronger and more athletic core. My name is Paul Klingen, and I'll catch you in the next Return of the Athlete video.